1 million square feet. That is how much office space Amazon has vacated in the city of Seattle since 2020. 7 buildings gone. And in February of this year, the company confirmed it will not renew its lease at 1915 Terry Avenue, a 251,000 square foot tower in the Denny Triangle that Amazon has occupied since 2014. Roughly 2,000 workers will be relocated, some of them to Bellevue, most of them across Lake Washington. The tension this video is going to unpack is not whether Amazon is leaving the Pacific Northwest. It is not. The tension is what Amazon's retreat from one specific city tells us about what happens when a municipal government treats its most consequential employer as an inexhaustible revenue source, and then acts surprised when that employer quietly starts moving the furniture out. Understanding how Seattle arrived at this moment requires going back to the spring of 2018, the tax that started everything. Amazon at that point employed approximately 45,000 people in Seattle. The city had been transformed by the company's arrival. Amazon estimates it generated $38 billion in economic activity in Seattle between 2010 and 2016 alone, according to data cited by the Brookings Institution. The Seattle region ranked third in the nation for prosperity growth between 2006 and 2016, per a Brookings analysis. The city was building, hiring, and booming, but it was also pricing people out. Homelessness was rising, rents had climbed sharply, and the Seattle City Council decided the mechanism to address all of this was a per-employee tax on large employers. The head tax, as it became known, would have levied a fee on businesses with annual revenues above $20 million, targeting roughly 585 companies. Amazon was, obviously, first in line. Amazon responded immediately. The company paused construction on one of its downtown office towers and told City Council member Mike O'Brien directly, and O'Brien's own recounting is instructive here, that they were not really asking for anything. "They're just telling us what they're going to do," O'Brien said at the time. The council repealed the head tax less than a month after passing it. Amazon then announced it would not occupy the Rainier Square tower it had been planning to move into, even after the tax was gone. The company won the fight. Then, to make sure the city understood the terms, it declined the prize. That pattern, capitulation followed by further retreat, is the one that has played out in slow motion ever since. The Jumpstart Tax, Round 2. 2 years later, in 2020, the City Council came back, this time with a different structure. The Jumpstart Payroll Expense Tax applied to companies with annual Seattle payrolls of at least $8.5 million, hitting employees who earned more than approximately $182,000 per year. The top rate is 2.5% on eligible payroll. Amazon is the primary target. When it passed, the city projected it would generate $219 million annually. The stated purposes were specific, affordable housing, homeless services, equitable economic development, and Green New Deal investments. Here is where the resentment lives. The tax raised $231 million in 2021's. The tax raised $1 million in 2020 in 2022. Then $393 million housing projects, on climate programs, on small business grants. And then, when other revenues fell short, it started raiding the Jumpstart Fund to plug holes in the general fund. Every single year since 2021, Jumpstart revenue has been diverted from its stated purpose to cover general fund expenses, according to reporting by GeekWire. By September 2024, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell was proposing to use $287 million from Jumpstart to close a $250 million general fund shortfall. The city's overall budget stood at $8.3 billion. Not one of the programs the tax was supposed to fund had solved the problems they were designed to address. No program sustains itself against math like that. By late 2024, the City Council approved the full $8.5 billion two-year budget for 2025 and 2026, with the largest ever diversion of Jumpstart funds into the general fund. Housing advocates called it a betrayal of the tax's original intent. The council passed it anyway. The departure, in concrete numbers. Amazon's employee count in Seattle peaked at approximately 60,000 in 2020. As of February 2026, the company's Seattle workforce has dropped below 50,000, enough to cost it the title of the city's largest employer. The University of Washington now holds that distinction, with more than 50,000 employees citywide. Visual note, side by side of the Amazon Spheres campus versus the University of Washington campus. Amazon did not reach this position through a single dramatic exit. It arrived there through a series of quiet, incremental decisions that, when laid end to end, tell a clear story. In 2020, Amazon vacated 6 office buildings in the South Lake Union and Denny Triangle areas. Those spaces were not backfilled. Then, in early 2026, the company confirmed it would exit the building at 1915 Terry Avenue, the 7th departure, at the end of May, with roughly 2,000 workers transferred to other locations in the Puget Sound. Elisa Carroll, an Amazon spokesperson, told GeekWire the employees would be relocated to other offices within the Puget Sound headquarters. Puget Sound, not Seattle. In January 2026, Amazon announced it was cutting 16,000 jobs globally. Documents filed with Washington state authorities showed approximately 1,400 of those cuts landed in Seattle, with an additional 700 in Bellevue. That followed an October 2025 round that cut more than 2,000 Amazon employees in the Washington region. Between October 2025 and February 2026, Amazon trimmed roughly 3,400 positions in the greater Seattle area across 2 rounds alone, where Amazon is actually going. The move is not a mystery. Bellevue is 9 miles east of Seattle, across Lake Washington. It has no city income tax, lower commercial real estate costs, and a business regulatory environment that Amazon has found considerably more hospitable. In February 2024, Amazon opened 2 new offices in Bellevue, West Main Tower 1, which provides over 300,000 square feet of office and collaboration space with capacity for more than 1,500 employees, and 555 Tower, which Amazon has leased up through the 19th floor. As of early 2024, Amazon had over 11,000 employees based in Bellevue. That number is rising. Amazon has been planning Bellevue 600, a 2-tower complex on a 3.5-acre site stretching from 108th to 110th Avenue Northeast. The first phase is a 43-story tower reaching 600 feet, which would make it the tallest building Amazon has ever constructed, with approximately 885,000 square feet of office space alone. The second tower adds 31 stories of mixed-use office space. Together, the 2 phases total approximately 1.7 million square feet above grade. That is roughly 1.7 million square feet being added to Bellevue at the same time Seattle is shedding space. The math here is not subtle. Amazon is not contracting. Amazon is relocating. What the vacancy numbers actually mean. Understanding what this relocation does to Seattle requires knowing what the office market looked like before any of it happened, and what it looks like now. Before the pandemic, downtown Seattle's office vacancy rate sat at roughly 6 or 7%, tight as commercial real estate markets go. According to CBRE data cited by GeekWire, the vacancy rate in the 4th quarter of 2024 hit 34.7%. A record at the time, and a 5-fold increase from the pre-pandemic baseline. It got worse. By the 4th quarter of 2025, Cushman & Wakefield reported the downtown Seattle office vacancy rate had climbed to 35.6%, up 330 basis points from the 32.3% recorded at the end of 2024. Class A vacancy, the premium floor space that tech companies prefer, jumped 340 basis points year over year to 35.1%. CBRE data shows Seattle lost over 257,000 square feet of occupied office space in just the 4th quarter of last year. In one quarter, none of this is happening in a vacuum. The Internationalist, a Seattle research firm, found in a recent study that 67% of Seattle area businesses describe their financial condition as worse now than during the pandemic. The same study, drawing on data from 136 responding companies, found 71% are seeing fewer customers than in the past. Amazon's departure did not arrive in isolation. Nike, The North Face, Vans, Saks, Abercrombie & Fitch, and Lululemon have all exited Seattle either as headquarters locations or significant retail operations. These are not decisions that happen for unrelated reasons. The fiscal hole that gets bigger the more you look at it. Here is where it gets worse. The jumpstart tax that the city built its budget around is now under structural pressure precisely because the companies paying it are shrinking their Seattle presence. In April 2025, Seattle's Office of Economic and Revenue Forecast, led by Director Jan Duras, delivered a forecast that cut $241 million from prior budget projections. Duras's office noted directly that in response to rising payroll tax rates, large companies subject to the tax have been moving or adding jobs outside Seattle, a trend that could be contributing to lower tax revenues from Jumpstart. When Amazon cut 2,303 Washington-based employees in October 2025, 1,887 of them in Seattle alone, Duras's office projected those cuts would directly erode Jumpstart revenues, given that the tax hits Amazon at the full 2.5% rate. The Office of Economic and Revenue Forecast's baseline scenario had projected Jumpstart would generate $392.7 million in 2026. The pessimistic scenario drops that to $359.4 million. The spread between those two numbers is $33.3 million. That is the annual budget of a mid-size American city fire department gone. Depending entirely on which direction Amazon's headcount moves, Washington state added $9 billion in new taxes last year. Business leaders in Seattle told the Economic Times in February 2026 that higher taxes being proposed at the state level on large companies and wealthy individuals could push the departure trend further. The city is sitting on a projected $247 million budget shortfall over the next 2 years, according to reporting by Kiro 7. The programs that were supposed to be funded by the tax, affordable housing, homelessness reduction, remain chronically underfunded. The money was diverted to plug general fund gaps that kept growing because the underlying cost structure of the city kept expanding. The city taxed its largest employer to solve a homelessness crisis. The employer reduced its footprint. The tax base contracted, the shortfall grew, and the homelessness problem did not go away. Now the city faces a budget hole funded by a tax on a shrinking workforce, the political record that built this. None of this is without precedent, and the people who built the policy conditions for this outcome were not acting in secret. In 2019, after the head tax repeal, Seattle City Council member Mike O'Brien acknowledged publicly that Amazon bore some responsibility for the city's housing affordability crisis, but stopped short of prescribing corporate tax remedies as the solution. Regardless, Amazon has not pursued any future development in Seattle since its public confrontation with the city council over the head tax in 2018. That is now 8 years of no new Seattle development from the company that built the city's modern economic identity. The Brookings Institution noted as far back as 2022 that the HQ2 search, Amazon's nationwide competition to find a second headquarters, was, in the words of journalist Victor Luckerson, an acknowledgement that Amazon was getting too big for Seattle. It also hinted that Seattle might be getting too unpleasant for Amazon. After Amazon chose Arlington, Virginia, and New York City for HQ2, and then retreated from New York after political opposition there, 5 Seattle City Council members signed a letter to Jeff Bezos apologizing if the company felt unwelcome in the Puget Sound. That letter did not produce a policy change. It produced an apology, followed by more of the same policies. The apology did not stop the slow migration to Bellevue, the systemic architecture of what happened. What makes this particularly sharp is that Seattle did not stumble into this outcome. The structure is legible, and it has been legible for years. A city facing a housing and homelessness crisis, fueled in part by a tech-driven economic boom, decided the solution was to tax the boom. The companies most heavily taxed responded by reducing their Seattle presence, not in a single press conference, not with a boycott announcement, but through the steady accumulation of lease non-renewals, headcount reductions, and new investment directed across the lake. The tax revenues that came in, and they did come in substantially, were not applied consistently to the programs the tax was designed to fund. They were used to plug a general fund that kept expanding to cover the costs of a city that was already struggling. The homelessness numbers, the vacancy rates, the business climate surveys, none of them improved in proportion to the amount of money collected. The Jumpstart tax raised over $830 million across its first 3 years of operation. Seattle still faces a $247 million shortfall. The company whose payroll underwrote a substantial portion of that revenue has moved below 50,000 employees in Seattle for the first time since the mid-2010s, is building a 1.7 million square foot campus in Bellevue. and vacated its 7th Seattle office building in February 2026. The city taxed its way toward solvency and housing stability. The tax narrowed its own base, and the base is now headquartered 9 miles east, in a city that didn't tax it. What the numbers were always saying. Think about what a 35.6% office vacancy rate actually means in a city the size of Seattle. 1 in 3 office spaces in downtown Seattle is dark. Not occupied by a company working out a sublease, not being renovated ahead of a new tenant. Dark. Producing no payroll tax, no business tax, no sales tax from the workers who would have been eating lunch nearby, no property value supporting the assessed values that fund city services. CBRE estimates Seattle lost 257,000 square feet of occupied office space in Q4 of 2024 alone. Puget Sound office vacancy across the full region reached 23.1% in the first quarter of 2026, according to Kidder Matthews, with negative net absorption of 486,708 square feet in that quarter. The retail pullout compounds the office problem. When Nike, Vans, Lululemon, and Saks close their Seattle locations, the foot traffic that kept small businesses alive disappears. The Internationalist survey showing 71% of Seattle businesses see fewer customers than before is not about remote work. It is about the downstream effects of an employer exodus that started with the tech sector and radiated outward. Amazon moving 25,000 jobs to Bellevue, a figure cited in reporting by Year of the Opposite, does not just move those workers. It moves their lunch tabs, their parking fees, their dry cleaning, their gym memberships, their happy hours. The city's sales tax base followed them across the bridge. 1 million square feet. Return to aerial of South Lake Union, this time at dusk. Contrast with lit-up Bellevue skyline in the background across the lake. 1 million square feet of Amazon office space that Seattle once held and no longer does. As of May 2026, a 7th building is being added to that tally, 251,000 square feet at 1915 Terry Avenue, vacated quietly at the end of this month. 12 years after Amazon moved in, the city taxed the company that built its modern economy. The company reduced its presence, the tax base contracted, the shortfall grew, and the tower that might have been built in Seattle is now going up in Bellevue. 43 stories. 885,000 square feet, the tallest building Amazon has ever constructed. The question worth putting to the people who live and vote in Seattle is this. At what point does a city's tax and regulatory posture toward its anchor employers become so predictable that the next Amazon simply chooses Bellevue to begin with? Leave your answer below. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, subscribe. There's more of this story to tell.